Most Muslims around the world would not actually do what Hamas did on October 7th and try to kill and rape and so on. But we see that many of them would go out and cheer and jubilate and exult when Hamas do these things. And we saw this not just in Gaza, but around the world. I'm not sure anybody is saying that we should send troops over to Europe to kick out the Muslims or anything like that. But if a child that has been born in the UK of Syrian parents, for example, that child is walking around singing death to Jews, yeah, that child should also be deported, yes.
So I have a problem with that.
Yeah? Deporting a child? Today, seems a couple of the things we say maybe seem a little bit radical, like what I just said. 10 years from now, none of this will seem radical, guaranteed.
Why should the people in the United States care if Western Europe turns into some big Islamist hellhole?
I think that should give us courage, exposure to other people's perspectives.
It's moving us in a good direction.
Should we be happy about the Islamization of Europe?
Not especially, no. Quite the contrary, I would go so far as to say. The Islamization of Europe, sometimes you'll hear people say something like, well, it doesn't really matter what God you believe in because it's something fairly personal, isn't it? So what does it matter if your neighbor believes in this God or that God? But this is actually something I've written about to a considerable degree, and Islam is very different from Western religions. And there are several reasons for that. We can lay out in philosophical detail what the problems are with Islam from a Western perspective.
But it is a Western religion. It's an Abrahamic.
No, it's an Abrahamic religion, but I wouldn't say that that's a Western. That's the same thing. There are 3 Abrahamic religions, but 2 of them are Western. And the reason I say that is because Judaism and Christianity became part of the West at an early time, in the Roman Empire.
You mean by
right?
Western. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, you have the West starting with Greece, and in a parallel time, you have Judaism arising, and then Judaism, through Christianity, enters the West in the Roman Empire. But that has then already taken place, and that has created something, a new civilization, a Western civilization, those things together. Islam comes many centuries later and within a generation has launched a war of conquest against the West, which already consists of these Greco-Roman and Judeo-Christian pillars. So we have 3 Abrahamic religions, but only 2 Western.
Okay, so you have written about the fact that there is no difference between Islam and Islamism.
Right.
Explain that to me, because I find that
hard
to...
Yeah, so I think conservatives, everyone, but...
Well, let's define these things first.
Sure,
Sorry.
So when people say Islamism, they mean a militant political version of Islam. And when they say Islam, they just mean the sort of general religion that people, keep to halal food and they go to the mosque, etc. But this is looking at Islam from a Western perspective. And it doesn't do justice to what Islam actually is. And so if we want to understand what Islam is, we have to understand that this distinction is a Western one. It's not an Islamic one. Islamism used to be synonymous with Islam. If you go back to the 18th century, look at some of the French writers, Enlightenment writers, when they write about Islam, they sometimes say Islamisme, Islamism, but they mean Islam. Sometimes they'll say Mohammedanism also as a synonym. And that continues in the 19th century. The idea of Islamism as meaning something separate from Islam, that doesn't come until the 20th century, in the 60s and 70s, when it gets this meaning of being a political version of Islam. And the thing is that Islam itself is already political, so there's no need to make that distinction. And this is not a critique of Islam in and of itself to point this out. Muslims themselves will happily explain that Islam is not just private faith, but it is an all-encompassing concept. And this is especially a problem that Protestant countries suffer from, because Protestantism, and especially Lutheranism, has this view of religion as being something very personal, direct communication between the believer and God. Catholics are slightly less prone to this because they have this whole sort of church hierarchy that that has a political dimension to it. Although as Catholicism weakens as well in Catholic countries, people there become prone to this error as well of thinking that there is a difference between religion and politics. We think of religion and politics as being 2 separate things, but this is not the case in Islam. Now, there are obviously different strains of Islam. They're not all the same. But if we're going to talk in a general in a general way here in order to distinguish as much as possible Islam from Christianity or from Judaism. This is the case that this is a Western distinction, Islamism and Islam. And the thing is, when people say Islamism, why does the left especially say Islamism? They say this because they're trying to protect Islam. And this is something that has to be understood, because if a Muslim behaves nicely and is an ordinary citizen like everyone else, he's a Muslim. If all of a sudden he commits a horrible crime and puts on a suicide vest or something like this, we call him an Islamist. Why? To save the Muslims and say these aren't Muslims, these are Islamists. To save Islam, to say this isn't Islam, this is Islamism. It is a way of protecting Islam, because we have this sugary Western prejudice that all religions basically just want peace on earth and kumbaya and love thy neighbor, etc. It's not true.
Okay, so help me. This is not in my area of expertise, so you got to be a little patient with me. I know that you have a PhD and you've published in this and written about it extensively. So what about, like, the stands? Stand means land. Like, what about those countries? They're not filled with people blowing shit up and going crazy. And
hey, did you know only half of you watching are subscribed? If you're enjoying the content, hit the subscribe button to keep the videos coming. Thanks.
Right. So obviously the actual people who literally blow themselves up, obviously that's always, thank goodness, always going to be a very small minority. Most human beings still don't actually want to die for a greater cause. Most people are just happy to kind of just live their lives. But if you're talking about what people actually think and what they believe in their hearts, then that's a very different story. Most people, Muslims around the world would not actually do what Hamas did on October 7th and try to kill and rape and so on. But we see that many of them would go out and cheer and jubilate and exult when Hamas do these things. And we saw this not just in Gaza, but around the world. And so the idea that Islamism is something separate is simply not true. There is Islam. Obviously, you can say that within Islam, there are more extreme and less extreme forms. There are many schools of jurisprudence in Islam, some of which would argue that, yes, indeed, what Hamas did was a war crime and broke Islamic law. That certainly exists. But...
Right. So there's disagreement. I remember when someone was burned alive in a cage.
I think it was in Jordan.
Yeah,
maybe?
in Jordan.
Yes. Yeah.
And there was bitter division in the Islamic world about that. And I do think there's a tendency to think about these things monolithically.
Right.
But when I look around the world, I see many peaceful, civil, sane might not be the right word, but because I'm an atheist, you're an atheist. I definitely see distinctions, even large distinctions like the Sunni-Shia split.
Yeah,
absolutely. So you think we should just do away with the term Islamism?
Yes. Which again, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is not one Islam. There are, just like there are different Christianities, there are different Islams, you could say.
Yeah.
That's true. But to say that when we say that all of these peaceful or seemingly peaceful Muslims are Muslims and everybody else is Islamists, that in itself is a distinction that effaces these other distinctions that you just referred to. So when we speak of Islam, of course, we can use additional adjectives like more radical type of Islam, a less radical type of Islam, and so on. Of course, I don't deny these distinctions. But to say specifically that the moment something becomes political, then it's no longer Islam, it's Islamism, that's absolutely wrong.
Okay, so let me ask you a question, something I've been thinking about. I saw just today some pretty heinous things of immigrants in the UK that Matt Goodwin tweeted out, and I saw some crime statistics. I think it was like 2003 when Ireland was the safest country, the most peaceful country, and then now, and I saw it was one of the most dangerous, and then it's the same people who surface to the top every time. Somali immigrants are Eritrean. It's the same. But I would be remiss in this discussion if I did not say who the group that have absolutely no problems, they contribute to the treasury, the lowest incarceration rate are the Japanese. Mm. So I just want to say that there's a balance. This is not a racial thing, as many people think.
Sure.
Okay. So this is what I've been thinking about. If you're not comfortable answering the question, don't answer it.
I'll be happy to.
So I was in Brussels recently, and I could not believe what a cesspool it was. I simply could not believe trash everywhere, and I didn't see any women. I saw many military-aged young men. I saw screaming. I saw let's just say, so we know that there's a demographic replacement. We know that Poland, Hungary, South Korea, Japan, we can just go around the world. And we know that what we used to call the third world, I don't like the term global south, but what we used to call the third world, those populations are rising. Let's just say that the people of Brussels were slowly replaced by Muslims from the Middle East. But the institutions were the same, and the judiciary was the same. What would that look like?
The judiciary wouldn't stay the same for long.
Okay.
And it would become, the judiciary would turn into a Sharia judiciary gradually. I mean, which we already see in several European countries where there are islands of Sharia law that are in effect. So that's what would
We
happen.
have parallel legal systems,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
exactly. And those parallel, the thing is, and this is also historically true, the Muslims to whom we're referring, they may seem somewhat tolerant now, but that's because they're in the minority. Once they're no longer in a minority or are approaching the cusp of a majority, their tolerance will correspondingly decrease, and the previous legal system will be marginalized. We can basically, I don't know if you want to get into this, but we can basically, for those who are philosophically interested, we can isolate a few specific reasons why Islam. Because it's one thing, to say, Islam is political, Islam is more radical, and so on. But why specifically this is the case philosophically?
Sure.
They're basically.
Would you mind?
Yeah. These are the three reasons. This is not an exhaustive list, but there are three reasons that I think are particularly salient, and I could go through them briefly.
Please.
So the first one we already touched upon, which is the political aspect. So. Islam, and this is actually somewhat similar to Judaism. Judaism has this sort of all-encompassing kind of attitude about quotidian restrictions, right. and all of the various aspects of life are regulated. But there's a crucial difference, which is that Judaism is not proselytizing, whereas Islam is also proselytizing.
Correct.
Christianity does not have this overarching political system where everything is controlled, but it is proselytizing. So the point is, and again, there are many different Christianities. One can get into much more detail, but if we're going to kind of cover the basics of the differences, Christianity is apolitical but proselytizing. Judaism is political but not proselytizing. Islam is the only one of these three that is political and proselytizing, which means that when they attempt to proselytize, they are not just pushing a theological construct like Christian missionaries do. They are also pushing a political construct. And that's what makes it imperialistic, to use our language that we're used to in the West. It makes it politically imperialistic. And so that's why it's so much more dangerous if the society around me turns Islamic, because it's not just going to be a question of their personal private faith. It's going to be a question of the political system in which we all find ourselves.
That it becomes institutionalized.
Yes.
So the legal system, the legal architecture will change, the institutions will change.
Everything will change. Exactly. And so that's the first problem.
Okay.
Then there are two more. That's the most serious one, so that's why I mentioned that one first. The other two, if we're going to, again, to compare it with Judaism and Christianity, since we said in the beginning, those two are Western, Islam is not. The second problem is that although there are Muslims today who are not Arab, Islam itself started in an Arab context. It started in a very tribal context.
Yeah, it was a colonial export in a sense.
Exactly. And this kind of the tribal birth pangs, if you will, of Islam still are an ingrained part of Islam. Now, in some non-Arab Islamic countries, you do see that this is slightly less of a problem. You can think of Turkey or Indonesia, for example, although Indonesia continues to be unstable, and now in Turkey, of course, they're kind of rolling back some of the secularism that they used to have since World War I. But the thing is, this tribalism, even though Islam has universalistic ambitions like Christianity, it remains very tribal, ethno-tribal, which is to say that when you have Islamic cliques developing within societies, they try to, of course, push their system on everyone else, but they remain very, very tribal. That is to say, assimilation doesn't happen, and they continue to be a state within a state until they've taken over the entire state. So that tribalism is another difference. Jews can be said to be tribal because Judaism is also an ethnicity, at least if we're talking about Ashkenazi Jews. But the thing is, again, they don't proselytize, which is why it's not a threat in the same way. Whereas, yes, Christianity is universalizing, but isn't tribal in this sense. So that's a second problem.
Okay.
The third problem is, again, as opposed to Christianity and Judaism, is that in Islam, there is no authoritative exegesis of Scripture. I like to compare this to the case in Judaism because that's the most clear contrast. If you want to read the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, all practicing Jews agree what the verses in the Torah mean. So a classic example is the famous verse, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, which we find in Exodus, Leviticus, a couple of places. So a lot of people, if they just read this verse, they think it means that, okay, you knock out my tooth, so I get to knock out your tooth, a kind of lex talionis. But this is not what it means, because the French medieval rabbi Rashi, who is the authoritative commentator on the Torah, he says that actually, no, this refers to a monetary indemnity. So if you knock out my teeth, you have to pay me damages. Doesn't mean that I get to do the same to you. And so this is authoritative in Judaism, which means that all practicing Jews believe this. The problem in Islam is that there is no Islamic Rashi, so to speak.
There's no Islamic exegesis like a universal...
Exactly.
Right.
There are plenty of exegetes in Islam, plenty of people of comments who comment on the Quran and say this means that and X means Y and so on. But there's no authority. There's no authoritative structure, which means that a radical preacher can lay just as much claim to his interpretation of the Quran being the correct one as a preacher who's more moderate and who might say that, well, these violent passages here, they don't really mean that, or at least not in the modern context and so on. So it's not possible for Muslims to say that, okay, this thing here is what our religion means, and you can all see that this is a peaceful interpretation. That doesn't exist. And that's why we see that within Islam, they can't agree on anything either with each other. The debates about what Scripture means in Judaism were settled through rabbinical argument, scholarly debate. In Islam, very often, they were settled by the sword, which means that obviously they ultimately weren't settled at all, because somebody comes around with a bigger sword, well, the debate starts again. And so that is another reason why Islam is a greater threat, because they don't have this authoritative exegesis. So those are the three main problems why Islam does not fit into the Western fabric in the way that the Christian and Jewish religion do. Okay,
so let me ask you a question at the risk of deeply offending you. I know that people are going to listen to this and they're going to say, oh, many people in the United States in particular, but also people in Western Europe, well, they did it to themselves. Fuck them. They let them in. They're still letting them in. And when you look at the statistics of people who are still coming in on boats, there's almost no appetite to stop it. People might be mildly disconcerted about it, but why should the people in the United States care if Western Europe turns into some big Islamist hellhole? Well, I mean, why should they? I mean, we're already, I say we as someone who's American, we have suffered the losses of repeated blood, money, treasure, war. Our sons, our family members have been slaughtered. Biden left billions of dollars of equipment in Iraq. I mean, why should the people of the United States care if Europe turns into a big Islamist shithole?
Yeah, well, it's well on the way already. So I hear also a lot of conservatives have this kind of attitude, to hell with them. They brought it, as you say, they brought it on themselves, and that's true, they did. And I'm not saying, I'm not sure anybody's saying that we should that we should send troops over to Europe to kick out the Muslims or anything like that. But
no, because Trump and MAGA said there's kind of an isolationist mood in the U.S. right now.
Yeah, there is.
So I know a lot of people are going to listen to this and this is something that I think that unites the left and the right. Well, who cares? Yeah. The left loves it. They think it's a terrific idea. Yeah. And the right's like, well, screw them.
Yeah. So, we have a long history of isolationism, of course, as you know, in the States. It kind of comes and goes in fits and starts. In American history right now, we're kind of going through a bit of an isolationist phase again. Although, must be said that Trump is not as isolationist as some of his acolytes or some of his fans.
He's no neocon. Okay, so why should
he's not a neocon. Yeah, he's like peace through strength, Reaganite mold, I would say, probably more or less.
Okay, so why should people
simply care? Because I think, because we come from Europe. And again, I'm not saying that we should risk American lives in some way to stop this, not at all. But at least we should care about it from a moral point of view.
But the Europeans don't care about it because they don't secure their own border. So why should the United States care about it?
Sometimes it's the outsider who understands better what's going on. I think I heard you even say sometime, I can't remember with whom you were speaking, but somebody was an immigrant to the States and who kind of explained certain things about the States to the American audience, and it's something like, sometimes, the outside perspective is useful. Yeah. And I think in this particular, we have inherited so much goodness from Europe. I mean, so much of what we treasure, Obviously, in the United States, freedom of speech, the list is endless, comes from England mainly.
So why should we care? Why
Because
should the people in the U.S. care if the whole of Europe is an Islamist shithole?
well, if you see your parents smoke themselves to death, for example, surely you would care. Doesn't mean you use violence against them or to stop them or something like that, but you care. And we are still part of an overall Western civilization. And those of us, we're in Europe right now. Of course, Hungary has thankfully been less prone to this mistake. And I agree with you. I lived in Paris for 3 years. I saw the city decline with my own eyes. Last time I was in Brussels, it was already terrible. That was several years ago. I can imagine it's only worse now. Same thing with London. My last time in London was 10 years ago. It was pretty bad then, so I'm sure it's much worse now. I think it's a bit of a personal shortcoming to say, and I know you're kind of playing devil's advocate also, but I think it's a bit of a personal shortcoming to just say, well, this is no concern of mine. Why should I care? Again, I'm not an interventionist. I'm not saying we should be in everybody's business.
But the people who smoke, they keep smoking. They don't care. So why should we rip the cigarette out of their hand?
Not rip the cigarettes out of their hand. That would be a violent intervention. But at least tell them, maybe that's not such a good idea.
I think Vance and others have done that with free speech.
But this is actually a good example. I liked his speech. I thought
it was amazing.
Yeah. I think on a purely political level, I think he's too much of an isolationist, but that's a whole other discussion. But that particular speech, I agree.
It was a speech that a Democrat would have given 20 years ago.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, well, a Democrat 20 years ago would have been a moderate Republican today. So today, look at like second-term Bill Clinton. But
so you think the people should care because we have a shared heritage in the West?
Yes, and because also if we think about our Western civilization as a geographical area, which it is. It's still a bit of a scary thought, I think, to see how the frontiers of that civilization shrink and shrink and shrink. Okay, so what happens? Europe goes, Australia goes, because you see
Australia is certainly going to go.
Yeah, we saw the Muslims jubilate by the Sydney Opera House on October 7th.
Gas the Jews, and then the police lied about what they said, and you can hear it you can literally hear it for yourself.
Exactly.
And then New Zealand, because of the Christchurch massacre, they can't push back on that.
That's right. And then my own city, New York City, gets a communist Muslim mayor, possibly. Possibly, we'll see. We're hoping in November.
We could have a whole conversation about that. But
right. But so the thing, like, what's going to be left? Fine, like Montana, and Tennessee and Kansas, like that's going to be left of the West. I don't want that to be the case. So I think it's time to speak up about this. And again, not advocate for violent intervention.
Every time you speak up, there's the narrative that you just can't get around. You're a right-wing Nazi. You're a right-winger. You're a Nazi. Like, okay, so what do you do about the problem?
Well, we continue to have conversations like this. We write about it. The thing is,
writing isn't going to do anything.
No, I know, but what's really going to do something is
political
continuing Islamization, making people wake up. A lot of people have written me and told me, I can imagine you've heard similar things, saying that, I used to be somebody who advocated for immigration, these poor Syrian refugees, et cetera, and now I see what's going on around me. I've heard people in Germany, Sweden, different places tell me this. I've changed my mind, is what they say. Now, obviously, not enough people have changed their minds. Okay, but the point is, there is at least something happening.
How does that manifest into actual?
You had a higher proportion than ever of young people in the last German election voting for the AfD, for example. So that's
they still didn't get in.
And because the German system is also such that it kind of is able to systemically keep the AfD out. So they would have to still have a much higher proportion of the vote in order to actually be part of a government. But at least it's something that can happen. We have various parties like this becoming stronger and stronger in France as well, in the UK. So we just have to hope that trend continues before it's until it's that goes to a certain point before it's too late.
It's interesting. So you speak English, French, Swedish, German. That's
a few other languages as well.
Okay. So you have something that I don't have, with the exception of my Hungarian. You have the ability, when you go places, you can talk to people, you can read the press. I can't do that, or only at a rudimentary level. So you can see things that I can't see, and you have access to venues that I don't. So my question is, in the same way that I just asked you, why should the U.S. care? Many Europeans, I would go so far as to say most Europeans don't care. Why should they care? I mean,
think we
they
should
don't
set
even
an-
care. It's
yeah.
their own country.
Yeah, I think we should set an example of virtue to them. I mean, we in the States we often congratulate ourselves as being a moral beacon onto the world and so on. Now that sometimes leads us to certain acts of hubris and so on. I think it's safe to say, but I also think that there is some truth to that. I think it's still true, and this is something else I've written about.
Yeah.
America is still the freest country in the world. I know these ridiculous freedom indices say that we're not, but that's because they misunderstand. They don't understand American culture. America is still the freest country in the world. Not to say that we don't have our problems.
But
Obviously
they don't.
We do.
Europeans don't want that. I mean,
Yeah.
look what's happening in the UK right now.
Yeah.
They clearly don't want that. They have an appetite. They want. It's all. What did Eric Fromm say? People don't want the freedom to choose. They want the freedom from choice.
Yeah. So I mean, look, if the British decide collectively that this is really what they want,
That is
and-
what they
yeah.
want, and we need to be honest about that
Yeah.
and not blame. Yeah.
No, so then if that's going to become an Islamic country, okay, then certainly we in the United States, we can't stop it. It's in their hands. But that doesn't mean that we should just sit there. I mean, when we see something bad happening in the world, we see somebody's about to kill himself, should we just sit there quietly and say nothing? Again, I'm not calling for any kind of violence or intervention.
Yeah,
but,
yeah, I know you're not. I know you're not.
But I think at least we should. It's always
Yeah.
good to be an example of virtue. I don't think one should ever just simply sit and be quiet as
Okay.
people kill themselves.
You mentioned
basically.
the mayor of New York, Minnesota. So let's just say, and again, just kind of guide me through a short term. Illegal immigration increases.
Yeah.
Legal immigration, there are no restrictions placed on it. People don't want to change the legal architecture. It's just too much work. Slowly, Sadiq Khan in London or the mayor of Birmingham, increasingly people occupy positions of power who then control institutions. We see parallel legal courts, erected Sharia courts. We see, and then in Sweden, the percentage of people. And again, I'm just so conscious. Every time I talk about this, I know people are going to tune out. They're going to be like, "This guy's a Nazi." Like any kind of. So
I don't even think it's worth entertaining the premise of such an accusation. And I mean,
but these are the people who are allowing this to happen. So we need to. Okay, so to what? I guess it's a philosophical question. To what rights do the people living in a country have to that land because their ancestors lived there?
yeah, actually, you touch upon a point now that I actually wanted to add before getting into the topic you just brought up, which is that of gratitude. And I know it might sound a little bit hackneyed, maybe, but gratitude is one of the keys to happiness, really, I think. And I know many people say this, but I think there's truth to that. And
I agree to that. I agree
yeah,
with that,
and to have inherited as much as we have from Europe, so much that we value, and to then just sit idly by as the Europeans kill themselves, I also think that shows a certain lack of gratitude, and I think it's important to at least to show our gratitude and to our appreciation for our own cultural roots by speaking up at least, at the very least, and to point out to them what they're doing, and to remind ourselves of the same thing also, because of course what happens in Europe is eventually, as we gradually see, going to come to our own shores as well. And so to start that conversation now is good, not just for the Europeans, but it's also good for ourselves, because then hopefully we will not make the same mistake as they did. And there's starting to be some American conservatives are starting to slowly wake up a little bit to Islam now. The problem in the States has been that, number one, we haven't been as exposed to Islam as the Europeans do, so we've kind of been blind to this. And secondly, because we have the as a part of our cultural fabric, the separation of church and state, and the idea that there should be no religious tests for office holding, that has led us to believe that all religions are equal. But if you look at some of these statements of several founding fathers about Islam, you see that they still had pretty clear opinions on Islam, what they thought about it. But so also for our own sake, not just for the Europeans, to show this gratitude to them, and also for our own sake, to make sure that we don't make the same mistake, I would add to your question about why we should care. And then as to the point that you're raising now about what's happening in the United States as well. So I think the Europeans could take advantage of the fact that they don't have freedom of speech anymore. I mean, effectively, Europe, Western and Northern Europe, doesn't have freedom of speech anymore.
England, I would say in particular.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. Yeah. And since that's no longer the case, why infringe on freedom of speech just on one political side? if the right
That's super interesting.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I never thought of that before.
Yeah, so if the right party comes into government at some point, well, they should do the same thing. Disenfranchise those elements that are hostile to us, even if they're citizens. That would be more difficult in the United States because we still have a fairly strong, again, we have our problems, but still a fairly strong sense of freedom of speech. We still have our First Amendment and so on. In England, forget it. They don't have that anymore. So disenfranchise the Muslims, at least the round ones, and kick them out.
So because they already don't have freedom of speech, just run with it.
Take
and just,
advantage of it, exactly.
Yeah.
Why should one side insist on this principle when the left so very clearly doesn't? We have to...
And just take away their freedom of speech.
And I mean,
then nobody has their freedom of speech.
Yeah, I mean, then of course people tell, oh, two wrongs don't make a right. That sounds very pretty in theory, but we're talking about...
But if you're already doing it,
exactly,
you might as well do it.
We're talking about a whole society committing suicide.
Right.
And affecting the lives of millions of people. Little postcard wisdoms like two wrongs don't make a right, it's not relevant.
God, that's so interesting. I never thought of that before.
Yeah, so I think they should, like you said, take advantage of that and run with it. So disenfranchise people, kick them out. If you protest,
You can protest
you
all you want, we'll
protest,
just arrest
yeah,
you because you don't have freedom of speech.
Exactly. You sing about death to all the Jews, waving a Palestine flag and so on. Take away your citizenship, send you to South Sudan.
Yeah, and the
End of
people
story.
can't complain about it because there's no freedom of speech. So what are they
Exactly.
going to complain about?
Correct.
Because we arrest people who have British flags on their cars, who make posts on social media.
Exactly.
So we'll just say we're going to be an authoritarian state. If you don't like it, fuck you, get out. We're just going to arrest
At least
everybody.
be an authoritarian state in the right direction.
Correct. Yeah, that's
exactly.
super interesting. Never thought of that before. Okay, so you and I are very pessimistic about Europe.
Yeah.
You know, I just throw this out, not to sully the conversation, but I was thinking, like, who should care about this? One of the things I was thinking about, to tell you, this seems like that's the stupidest thing, but it's really true. When I walk around Eastern Europe and Eastern European cities, beside the fact that never once do I look over my shoulder, never once. I put my headphones in because I have tinnitus pretty bad in this area. Put my headphones in, I walk, I never look over my shoulder. If I'm in a cafe, I leave my laptop in. Like in Taiwan, you leave your wallet on the table.
Nice.
But, one of the things I really love about high trust, this is a high trust society,
Yeah.
is I love the fact, I'm almost self-conscious I'm telling you this because it sounds so stupid, but in all downtown areas, there are trash bins. They're not worried about people planting bombs.
Right,
So
I
if
see.
I don't have to carry my trash around with me everywhere, and then people just throw it on the street, I just throw it in the trash can. And it's just like such a simple, small thing. So I'm trying to think about, it reminds me of something that Elon Musk said about solar roofs. The number one thing that will cause people to adopt a solar roof is not its efficiency, is not how much money it will save them. It's none of that stuff. It's how it looks. So I'm wondering if it's not, if you can't, because if you say to someone, listen, they're going to wreck parallel courts and they're going to be like in Washington State, there was just an honor killing by the side of the road, like all this crazy stuff or an attempt at honor killing. If you say that, people say, well, it's just their cult. They're kind of a relativistic attitude toward that. But if you say, well, you're going to lose trash barrels in the downtown, you're going to lose like some small conveniences, maybe the price of produce, if you can link it to that, it's going to go up. So I don't know. I'm wondering if the way to deal with this problem, I don't know. I do think that there's so much being written about it and spoken about. I do think that ultimately it's not another. I get invited to talks and festivals. I'm like, no, that's not going to move the needle. It's like you have to do some political change. Like you have to have some kind of something that moves the needle politically. Okay.
Yeah.
So you've written about what's the opposite of xenophobia? This is fascinating to me.
Oikophobia.
Talk to me about that. That's fascinating. Last time we had you on your show, I got tons of email about this. This is
Oh, nice.
fascinating.
Good.
Yeah.
So, and which is related to, partly the reason why we have this problem that we've been discussing is also because of oikophobia. So oikophobia, as you mentioned, the opposite of xenophobia, fear or hatred of one's own home or house, household, is what the term means. And this is, as we discussed in our last conversation about 2 years ago, this is a phenomenon that hits Western societies at a certain point in their development when they have achieved enough wealth and security, freedom from worries about external enemies, so as to be able to turn their concentration inward, their self-critique inward, and measure oneself against other members of the same society rather than measuring oneself against some external enemy. And it's also a result of a degree of egalitarianism and democracy, because intellectuals can then exchange ideas without worrying about being censored by the church or the state or what have you. And so this is something that has come and gone in Western societies since antiquity. We see the first traces of Oikophobia already in basically early 4th century BC Athens.
Oh, I thought you were going to say in early K through 12 educational systems in the States, and I was
well,
going to
that too,
completely
yeah.
agree.
That's definitely true, yeah. And yeah, which is another problem, because most school teachers, well, maybe I'm opening in a whole other can of worms here, but
No, please.
most school teachers being young women, and who are more prone, because they're sort of more naturally empathetic and so on, are more prone to oikophobia. Some of them then will mature later on. In some cases that does happen. But because of this care for the other, that's not the same as oikophobia, but you can see how that leads to oikophobia, because if you care for the other, you kind of denigrate or de-emphasize at least the traditions of your own society in order to care for the other. And that is then that attitude is then brought into the school and influences the next generation. But so when and oikophobia is very often coupled with allophilia, so love of the other, because people still feel the need to have some kind of an ideal, to look up to something. This is just a human drive, that we desire something beyond ourselves. So if we denigrate our own civilization, our own traditions, well, then we look abroad and we see, this Islamic religion or this tribal African religion or what have you is beautiful and authentic and noble and so on. So then, of course, it becomes much easier for foreign elements, in this case Islamic elements, to be invited in, as we've been talking about.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just don't. Why don't you do that with the Japanese? Why don't you do that with the Chinese? This is a serious question.
Because there is this kind of desire. The Japanese seem to be doing pretty well, and
not economically, but
no, that's true.
But
they're
as
not,
a society,
but relatively
they're
speaking,
thriving.
yeah, exactly. And also because the Japanese have been very westernized. Now, when the Japanese at that time in history we didn't have as much oikophobia in the West, and so the Japanese were never really the beneficiaries of oikophobia. But if we're talking about pre-industrial Japan, before the Meiji Restoration in the 1860s, when Japanese society was much more, quote-unquote, authentically Japanese, if you will, that would have seemed very exotic and interesting also to a typical Western oikophobe.
But we exalt societies that are intrinsically, I don't want to say flawed, but that really is the word.
Societies that are very different from others.
That are not flourishing.
Yes, except it's not so much that they're not flourishing, rather that it's that they're very different from us. The more different they are from us...
China is super different from us. Japan, well, I guess Japan is westernized. South Korea is westernized.
Yeah. And the more they seem different from us, the more they seem exotic, authentic, and pure.
Then why don't we do that with healthier communities like the Sikhs? Why do we find those societies in which the conditions to immiserate them are embedded in the structure of their societies, like tribalism? Why do we exalt the It's almost like a kind of suicide.
Yeah, there is a certain primitivism that often mixes with oikophobia, and you find this already in Enlightenment France at a time when, and even earlier after the Age of Discovery, when the fascination with native tribes that have just been discovered was all the rage in Europe, and it was very much in vogue to kind of to talk about these things and to be interested in those tribes. But that comes especially to a head in the Enlightenment in France, which is where we find the kind of one of the major manifestations of one of the major and earliest manifestations of oikophobia in the modern era is mid 18th century France. And there is a line in Rousseau, for example, which I love. Rousseau himself was an oikophobe, but he has these moments of lucidity where he criticizes oikophobia in Voltaire, for example. They don't use this word, which is a neologism, but he says. He doesn't mention Voltaire by name, but he's pretty clearly talking about Voltaire because it was also written at a time when those two were at loggerheads with each other. Yeah. He says, "Beware of those philosophers who love the Tartars so as not to have to love their countrymen."
Oh, interesting.
Which is this kind of primitivism. The Tartars, they're very different from us, obviously, from French civilization. And so you don't want to love your own countrymen because somebody like Voltaire, and Rousseau for that matter, he was Swiss, from Geneva, but anyway, he's in the same cultural ambit. They raise themselves individually from the rest of their society. And so in order to raise yourself away from French society, say these people are beneath me, you have to ally with something that is very, very different from French society. The Tartars, from their perspective, are about as different from the French as can be. So they're the ones who become the beneficiaries of the allophilia and oikophobia of somebody like Voltaire. And that kind of oikophobia mixed with primitivism, because again, you want to be as far away from your own society as possible, morally speaking, that is then continues, and we see that today as well in modern oikophobia.
Is oikophobia, to borrow Rob Henderson's term, is that a luxury belief?
More or less. So other things being equal, a person who is part of the elite, quote unquote, or has advanced degrees is likelier to be an oikophobe than a working class individual. That's true. However, that was more the case. That is more the case the earlier back we go in history. The closer we get to modern times or to the present day, the more oikophobia spreads into the middle classes and sometimes even to the lower classes.
Oh, interesting.
And that's because education itself has become democratized.
Yeah, absolutely. Explain that. I've thought that's great. Explain that.
Yeah. So I mean, it used to be the case that most people were quite uneducated. Many people didn't even know how to read. But you had the elite that was very, very highly educated. So there was a much greater gulf educationally between the upper crust of society and everybody else. And so in those days, it was really just that upper crust that was prone to oikophobia, that was prone to temptation to ideas coming from outside. But as education has been democratized, now everybody goes to school. It used to be that everybody should go to high school. Now there is the idea that everybody should go to college, which is nonsense, but there is the idea everybody should go to college.
I totally agree with that.
It's so ridiculous. So thank you, Obama. But basically, not just him, but he was one of the strongest voices for this ridiculous idea.
We could talk about. I'm a huge fan of vocational education, but that's another thing. So
something I like about Germany, where I received most of my own education, because they're much stronger on vocational training. But anyway, so the more regular people, quote unquote regular people, middle class, working class people, finish high school and even go to college, the more they also will become exposed to these ideas. And so the gulf between the highest educated members of society and those with middling education is much narrower now than it used to be. And so that's why we see today oikophobia also spreading to the middle classes and even lower classes. We see, because in Greece and Rome, it was really just an elite phenomenon.
It's a Western phenomenon by and large.
By and large. We find it in the non-West as well, mainly as an influence. I can talk about that too if you like. But basically, French Enlightenment oikophobia is already to some degree a middle-class phenomenon. And you see that even more late Victorian England. You even see it spreading into the working class during the Boer War, for example, because then there's this idea that, the Boer War was started by the Jews and the capitalists and on the back of the English worker. And so this kind of self-hating, this critique against one's own country spreads into the lower classes there as well. That's kind of where we start to see it for the first time in terms of the spread of oikophobia. But by and large, it's still more of an upper-class phenomenon, to go back to your original question.
So the older I get, the more I find a kind of beauty in the symmetry between one's actions and the outcome. Mm-hmm. Smoking causing cancer, increasing the number of immigrants from societies that are inherently hostile, and then the consequences of that. There's a kind of, I don't know how to describe it. I was thinking about it when I was on the train over here this morning. There's a kind of like, I don't want to say equanimity. I don't really know what it is, but like it seems like the seeds of the demise of the West are sown within the West.
Yes, absolutely.
And so that's that kind of perfect symmetry. Like, so how do you? Because I'm a big fan of the West. I want to preserve the West. Unfortunately, many people in the West hate the West. They don't want to preserve the West. I don't know if they intentionally want it to be Islamized, but it doesn't bother them. Mm-hmm. They think they suffer from a kind of weird cultural, moral, and epistemic relativism. Mm-hmm. How do we combat that? The very idea that the seeds of our destruction are sown within the fabric of our societies.
Yeah.
We hate ourselves.
Yeah, there is that symmetry. The problem is that if we look at history, we don't really see significant cases of oikophobia being significantly rolled back once it has taken hold. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. Obviously, we shouldn't be victim. We shouldn't become fatalists
Yeah, like
and
what's
be
a
victims to
solution?
history.
I want to give a solution so people can listen to this. We're not just two dudes complaining about something.
Right.
Like, what action can people take to fight this?
So probably maybe the first, and like in terms of government action, for example, but also individual action, probably the first answer is to say have lots of children. Because, and this, like here in Hungary, for example, the government, of course, has made serious efforts to try to make people have more children with at least some success. The idea that is that even somebody who generally doesn't care that much about tradition or about the inheritance that they have received from our ancestors and so on, once a child is there, very often there is a natural inclination to want to pass something on to the child.
Okay, I'm going to pause you.
Yeah.
So even if we did that, like tax credits or what have you, the number of people in low trust societies are booming, and they're having kids at younger ages, and they're just getting on boats and coming. So there's no way. I don't think if. I'm just pushing back.
Yeah,
I
of
just
course,
don't think that's a solution.
Well, it's certainly not the only solution. No, it's
Even
one
if-
piece of the puzzle.
Even if we were like to put MDMA and like put it in the water supply and everybody's having sex with everybody and having kids, like that wouldn't even stop the disparities are just too great.
Yeah, so I mean, another part is to close up the borders and to only let in a very, very specific type of immigrant.
Well, we know that won't happen.
No, right. Yeah, well, although, I mean, right, at least in the United States now, there is at least, the government
I
is showing
was
that
thinking
there is
Western
some
Europe,
effort.
but okay,
Right,
all right.
okay, fine. Yeah, Western Europe, you're right. Yeah, so Western Europe, that's
Okay,
probably-
but you're right. We should have. You're right. Let me take that back. How do we stop the oikophobia in Western Europe and the United States?
Yeah.
So having kids,
closing
the borders.
Exactly. Religion plays another part. Now, as you said, you and I, right, that's something that's less appealing to us. But what I would say is even people who don't believe in God or the Bible, whatever had the theological construct, to at least understand, and this is something that I myself have actually embraced to a considerable degree, to understand the aesthetic, to appreciate the aesthetic aspect of
I'm
religion.
culturally Christian.
Right, there you go.
Yeah.
And this is something to kind of become a little more popular now on the right. I even heard Dawkins, right? He said something similar a couple of years ago. Didn't he?
He said that for years.
Oh, did he? Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
someone found that recent quotation.
Oh,
but
I
yeah.
see. Okay.
Yeah.
And to understand that we still need religion. Even if you don't believe in it, we still need religion as a kind of a foothold. Because, again, the cornerstone of every civilization is religion.
Because if you don't get that, you get like pregnant men.
Exactly.
You get people
This
just
is
coming
exactly
completely
right.
insane.
And this is why I love people, on the one hand, militating against religion and against the church and so on, and at the same time complaining about the infestation of postmodernism in science, not understanding that the latter was a consequence of the former. And so, again, one doesn't have to believe in it, but at least to appreciate the aesthetic aspect of it. There was a time in my life, for example, when I was living in Germany, I had a good Catholic friend. Well, he's still my friend. I would go to Latin Mass sometimes. I'm not a Christian. But I went to Latin Mass sometimes on Sundays just because I thought the Latin singing was beautiful, because I knew there was a community there that wanted to have a kind of an island of faith away from the materialism and hedonism of society and so on.
So an appreciation of cultural things. It's very difficult to do that, I would add, or I would argue, if the entire K through 12 and educational apparatus is set up.
Yes.
It's almost like an oikophobia factory.
Yeah, it is. I would say it almost literally is an Oikophobia factory. Yeah, and that's another additional piece of the puzzle, which is that education has to be reframed in a much more heroic kind of a way. We have to have which we used to have, a heroic framing of our own national histories, which doesn't mean, of course, that one ignores bad things, but it means that even bad things should be put in a redemptive, heroic context. And that goes also a little bit to the gratitude that we were talking about before. I was actually talking to a middle school history teacher not long ago who had been teaching her kids about the Trail of Tears and about how, isn't it awful what the Americans did and the poor Indians and so on. And I told her, look, you're actually being very ungrateful. It doesn't mean, of course, that we can't sympathize with an innocent Native American child who was the victim of this and had her family uprooted and so on. We can certainly sympathize with those things. But we also have to understand that those things that happened and the Americans who did this, our ancestors, what they did is part of what allowed us to have this flourishing civilization today. And even though we might take issue with certain specific things that happened or certain decisions, we should have a basic attitude of gratitude to those who came before us, because we're sitting here, well, not right now, but when I was having this conversation in New York City, this gleaming city, that is a direct result of the actions of our ancestors. And it is the height of ingratitude to sit there in your armchair and criticize Andrew Jackson or whomever you like for what they did, even though you are the beneficiary of their actions.
Yeah, the problem with that, I would argue, is that there's a kind of circularity embedded in that, because people, I think that we should have gratitude, but these people, by definition, they don't think that they should have gratitude.
Yeah.
So I do think that there's a kind of E.D. Hirsch things that every educated American should know. I think that there's a canon that we should teach people. I remember years ago in the early 2000s, I met, or maybe mid-2000s, I met someone who taught history in high school, and she didn't know, she never even heard of McCarthyism. Like literally never even heard of it. And I was just flabbergasted by that. So
yeah, so I mean, you're right. Sometimes it can happen that more difficult parts, if you will, of our past are ignored completely. I'm not saying that should be the case. Although one could argue, again, opening a second can of worms, but one could argue that McCarthyism wasn't. Not that I'm saying that everything that McCarthyism was a good thing, but maybe not as such a completely unmitigated evil as it has sometimes been portrayed to be.
She was teaching high school, and she never heard of it.
Oh, she was teaching in high school, and she had never heard of McCarthy. Oh, interesting.
I should have explained that better.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, okay.
She was teaching high school. She
I
never
saw
even heard of.
an English teacher who didn't know the difference. An English teacher didn't know the difference between whose and whose with apostrophe and without se. Yeah,
wow.
Teaching English. Yeah. So yeah, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah. So you have it's really part of the postmodern condition.
Yes.
Like we don't need this. We don't need to know this. We need all knowledge is relative. All knowledge is. I love the term applied postmodernism, the Helen Pluckrose's term. It's a kind of applied postmodernism in an educational arena. Maybe this is just one of my lenses, but I think it starts with education. I think it starts with, I hear people, I don't know, am I getting older? Am I getting I hear people speak and they're just speaking in ways that I have to, I remember when I was in New Orleans for a while, I really liked this woman. That's when I ate more sugar and dairy. She served us ice cream. She's American. I honestly couldn't understand a thing she was saying. Like nothing. The accent. It wasn't just the accent, but the diction, the grammar. I do think that limits her opportunities.
Yeah, I was sitting on a bench in Central Park the other day, and two young ladies sat down next to me speaking to each other, and I had to get up within a minute and leave because I couldn't stand how they were raping our beautiful English language.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And you say that from someone who speaks multiple languages. Yeah. So you're okay. So we both agree.
Yeah.
We're in the. Okay, would you say the West is not doing well, or would you limit it to
No,
Europe?
I would say the West America is doing well relative to Europe.
Oh, that's certainly true.
Which is not to say that America is doing well as such in a more absolute sense. So no, I wouldn't say that the West is doing well. Quite the contrary. But I am more optimistic about the United States, yes.
So what? Okay, let's say that tomorrow, as if by magic, everyone was like, listen, we have a right to vet who comes in our country. There are people coming in here who are raping and murdering, and we need to immediately end illegal immigration, like just tomorrow. And everyone was like, yep, we need to do it.
Yeah.
They put boats around the UK. Like, so let's say that they did
And
it.
not just illegal immigration, but also
But I'm gonna
severely restrict legal.
Well, I was going to get there the next,
Okay,
and
sorry.
then in the Schengen zone, they say, okay, then we go for legal immigration. Okay, so let's say that we get the illegal immigration under control, the legal immigration under control. How's it looking now?
Yeah. So looking better already, but it's not going to be enough because
I agree,
because you already have too high percentages of Muslims already in the country, and who
not just
reproduce
men,
at a greater rate.
At younger ages.
Yeah.
Men, almost exclusively men.
Yeah.
Fighting age.
Yep.
Unskilled. What I would add would be a key to that.
Yeah. unskilled, exactly, and who intermarry and have their wives, their English wives or French wives, what have you, convert to Islam, of course, and then raise their children in the Muslim faith. And it's remarkable the extent to which I was walking past the Parliament building in Stockholm last year and noticed that a lot of the guards there were very clearly of Middle Eastern extraction. And I mean, it's interesting to see. I don't want to sound dystopian, but I mean, really, how once things have gone far enough, how things could just turn on a dime and saying, okay, we own this Parliament building now. It's ours, and that's it, and there's nothing you can do about it. And not just in Stockholm, you see similar things in many places. I mean, police forces, like it was in Amsterdam, they had to reassign Dutch, quote-unquote, the Dutch police officers away from guarding Jewish monuments because they didn't want to, because these were Muslim Dutch police officers, and so they didn't want to guard the Jewish monuments, which you would think would be enough to fire them, but no, they just get reassigned to guard non-Jewish places. It's unbelievable, but this is where we are. That is to say, it's not just that we are developing parallel societies and Muslim states within states, but that the custodians of our own state themselves are increasingly Islamic and less willing to serve as proper custodians of our states, of our societies. So basically, the immigration question is an important one, but it's not the only thing. We have to also, as we mentioned before, in Western and Northern Europe, a lot of millions of people have to be disenfranchised and deported.
If we were able to do that, well, as I'm not European, but if the Europeans were able to do that, you'd be more hopeful about the sustainability and survivability.
Yes, I would. People then say that, oh well, we need immigrants for our jobs and so on.
Ask you that.
Yeah. So the reason I think that's I don't think that's an acceptable counter argument is that yes, obviously it would have an economic impact, no question about that. But these kinds of things tend to be self-regulating over generations. It's not something that's going to be self-regulating immediately. Yes, there will be economic pain and lower standards of living for a while. But the thing is, if a society, because of low birth rates and because of having deported millions of people, has to go through a bad economic phase, the response to that naturally, demographically, will be more children. And so, within a generation or two, the problem will be mitigated. And so, to say that there's going to be some,
Well, wait a second. I'm sorry to push back on you, but I'm not sorry, but I was just reading that the children of immigrants tend toward criminality more than those immigrants, and I can find that after the show.
No, but that's you're quite right. Yeah, I've seen the same statistics. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Yeah. No, I'm saying the not just immigrants, but indeed, if a child that has been born in the UK of Syrian parents, for example, that child is walking around singing "Death to Jews." Yeah, that child should also be deported. Yes.
So I have a problem with that.
Yeah, deporting a child
born in the country.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Not if the child was born out of the country.
So I think we're looking at that, and I mean, I understand that, but we're looking at it from an American perspective. And note that what I'm saying here, I am not applying to the United States. Now I'm talking only about Western and Northern Europe. Disenfranchisement because the point we made before about how if you're going to be an authoritarian state and you've already suppressed freedom of speech, do it in the other direction as well. That's not the case in the United States. So that kind of authoritarianism, I'm not advocating for the United States. We still have our First Amendment, which is precious.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So there's a kid who's, let's say that he's an age where he could be actually dangerous to somebody, like 16. I got tapped out in jiu-jitsu by a 13-year-old once. So, which is another thing that almost no one talks about is if you go into, because I've told people this, and do you do any martial arts?
No, I lift weights.
Okay, so, well, this would be lost on you, so there's no point to tell you. But so there's no point to the example. But it's if you go to these MMA schools, they're almost entirely, they're radically disproportionately filled with Muslims.
Yeah, okay.
And no one understands. Literally, unless you do MMA, you don't understand what that means. Okay, so let's take somebody who's 16, for example.
It makes sense within the Islamic context we've been discussing anyway, but okay. Fine.
But no one understands that you're training people within your country to kill you.
Right. Yeah.
And you don't understand how one well-trained person in MMA can really wipe out a whole bunch. I mean, but anyway, okay. So you have somebody who's 16 in Western Europe who's running around, death to the Jews, hate Jews, gas Jews. Hitler was a good dude. Maybe they wouldn't say dude. Hitler was a great guy. What do you do about that?
Send him to Syria. End of story. He has no business being in Europe. And no exceptions for, family members. No, gone. It's gotten to this point. Again, I know that's going
Even
to sound
if they
a
were
bit
born
brutal.
in the country?
Oh, yes. Out. Yeah. He has no business being in the UK or in France or what have you. And again, yeah, I'm aware. But this is the thing. This is also something I wrote in my long text on Islam. Some of the things that I say now, 10 years ago, much of what we're saying right now would have seemed very radical.
Right,
Today,
far right.
Yeah, exactly. Today seems a couple of the things we say maybe seem a little bit radical, like what I just said. 10 years from now, none of this will seem radical, guaranteed. Or less than 10 years, but 10 years for sure, none of this will seem radical because things will have continued to get to a point where more and more people will say, yes, of course, he has to be deported, of course. So yeah, we're just kind of nipping it in the bud, but it's going to come more and more people will agree with. I mean, already now, I'm sure some people who will listen to this are already agreeing, but more and more people will come to agree.
Yeah,
with
and I
that.
think maybe it's just that I'm an American, and I think you're born in America. We don't deport you, like
Right.
we deal with you. And I
Again,
think
yeah, so
Europe is a different context.
Europe is a different context. So number one, as we said, we do have a stronger sense of freedom of speech in the United States, and that's something we should still be very protective of because we haven't gotten to that point.
Yeah.
And something we should not just be protective of, something we should be proud of. But yeah, Europe is simply a different story. And this goes, we mentioned before that a lot of American conservatives haven't grasped Islam because they haven't been exposed to it as much. And also because, again, as I mentioned, we have this idea of...
And the left loves it. The left wants more and more of it.
The left adores it. And so that is a bit of a different context. But I invite skeptics in the United States to go to some of the cities we mentioned, Brussels, London, Berlin, Paris, etc., not to walk around in the tourist areas, but to go where people actually live.
100%.
And they will come back and to stay there, a couple of months, and they'll come back with a different opinion.
But you know what I think that they'll say?
Yeah.
So in terms of ideologies, almost nobody has a moment of honesty with themselves. So like this guy Mamdani, if he is mayor and the city goes to shit, I can guarantee you with total certainty what people are going to say. It was the far right. The far right did this to this guy. They're upset. They didn't. It's a when he defunds the police, taxes white neighborhoods, makes a supermarket desert, all of this stuff. It's the far right. So I don't think people will be honest about the problem.
I think that's true for a lot of people. As a New Yorker, I feel I have to defend my city a little bit. But no, I mean, I think you're right to a great extent. What we see sometimes in New York, I mean, we did have Giuliani, for example, after a period of Democrat rule. So, I mean, and New York is not the only place in which this is true, that it kind of goes a little bit in waves. People have an extremist. I mean, Mamdani is worse than previous Democrats, has to be admitted.
For sure,
yeah.
absolutely.
He's one of a kind, but things go to hell. And so then they vote in a moderate Republican. Things get better, and then they forget how things were when they went to hell, and the kind of cycle continues. But so my only hope is if Mamdani does become elected and he does exactly as what we both think he's going to do and what he says he's going to do, exactly, it's like he's not hiding it.
Right.
That then at least things will become so bad that then maybe we do get a moderate Republican or at least a moderate Democrat as our next mayor.
Maybe this is a point of disagreement. I'll tell you one thing, and then I'd love to hear your thoughts. I actually want him to become mayor in a sense.
Yeah.
I want him to become mayor because I want him to destroy the city. And
thank you very much. Yeah.
The reason that I want him to destroy the city, I love New York. I spend a lot of time in New York. I'm going to spend time in New York because I think that in democracies, that's the beautiful symmetry I was talking about.
Right.
I think in democracies, you have to be accountable.
Yeah.
And I think people need to learn the lesson. And history is replete with people not having learned the lesson. So we need to see what happens when you defund the police. We need to see what happens when you have state-run supermarkets. We need to see what happens when you tax white people and put an extra tax on
So basically,
rich
you
people.
want me and my neighbors to be your guinea pigs, yeah?
No, I don't want anything.
I'm
I don't
joking,
want anything.
But yeah.
You are the people who are voting for him. I mean, in a democracy,
I was going to vote for Sliwa, but now I might have to vote for Cuomo if he's the only one who
Could you imagine
stands a
that?
chance.
That would be.
I hold my nose and vote for Cuomo.
No,
yeah.
I know. Well, yeah. But I do think that we have to take responsibility in
I agree with
democratic
that, sure.
systems,
Yeah.
with one major caveat, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I don't want to offend you when I say this. no federal fucking bailout.
Right.
Nothing.
No, I agree with that,
Zero.
yeah.
You voted this lunatic in, now you're going to deal with it.
Yeah.
The problem is they're going to blame it on the far right. For whatever reason, the far right boogeyman is somewhere out there, and they're going to say, well, this would have been some utopia. Okay, let me throw out an idea to you. And, that's only partially tongue-in-cheek. I don't want the lunatic to get in, but if he does get in, people need to understand there are consequences for your votes and your decisions, your political decisions. So my friend Reed hates this idea, but let me throw something out. So I have been thinking long and hard about why Europe is doing this to itself. Mm-hmm. In one sense, and I've been reading about it this is out of my area, I think in one sense the argument could be made, well, the hammer blows of modernity and liberalism, they'll come here, they'll become, enlightened liberals, the kumbaya, Shangri-La, everybody will be fine. Nobody wants the secret police to kick their door in at 2 a.m. They're going to realize how wonderful it is living in a high-trust society, and they're going to integrate. Everything's going to be fine. Okay. Maybe some people believe that. Maybe. I'm going to throw out an idea that may mortify you, but I'm going to throw it out, and you give me your honest opinion about this. My friend Reed despises this idea. This is such an obviously suicidal idea to import hundreds of millions of people who despise you, who despise your culture, many of whom have never seen women unveiled. Douglas Murray has written about this. Other people have written about this. And for the billionth time, as is mandatory in all these podcasts, not all Muslims, not even most Muslims, the majority of Muslims. That's my take. You can...
Yeah, it depends on what the rest of the sentence, but I might disagree with that, yeah.
Okay. So why would someone do this? Yeah. Like, why would, if you want to term it, people talking about the elites, why would the elites do this? Is it ignorance? Is it kind of this Pollyanna, everything's going to be fine? Before I tell you a speculation, is it because we want cheap goodies, because we want, low produce or like plastic goods that we get from China, we just need, or because we see falling demographics? How about this for an idea? We hate Jews. We tried a final solution. It didn't work. So we're going to import people in who we know are going to kill the Jews and hate the Jews, so they're going to have to flee. Because we know everywhere that there are increased Muslim populations, Jews flee. This is an empirical fact. People can deny it. Maybe there's a fringe example where that's not the case, but by and large, that's the case. So we can get rid of our Jews in Western Europe if we import more Muslims. Do you think that was running through anybody's head?
Not maybe in some discrete individuals, but I don't think that's any of the major causes for this. No.
Okay. What do you think? If I did or didn't mention it, what is the cause of people doing something that's so obviously going to cause the death of their civilization?
Yeah, so it's all of the above, except for the Jewish part. I don't think that's a big part of. Again, there might be some individuals who welcome it for that reason, but I don't. On the part of government action, I don't think that's a big factor. But the part of it is the economic reasons, falling birth rates and so on, and cheap goods, etc., the things that you mentioned. And part of it is also what we've been talking about, oikophobia and allophilia. An enormous naivete about, and arrogance, really, you have to say, in thinking that other people are like we are and believe what we do. That is, and it's so funny because these people, they accuse people who are more on the right of ethnocentrism, but they're the ones who are ethnocentrists because we actually bother studying other civilizations and trying to understand them. Whereas they just assume that they see everything through their own Western lens and assume that these immigrants view society and gender roles and everything else just like we do. And so they're the ethnocentrists. And I would say, and I think polling data also bears this out, that when you say that not even a majority, I do believe you're absolutely not every Muslim, sure, that we can agree on. Yeah, but so it is a majority of Muslims who do at least have some sympathy for what Hamas did. Okay,
let's talk about that because if I'm harboring a misconception, I want to end it immediately. So we both agree. And maybe our disagreement is just what the percentage is. So let's use as the litmus test Hamas.
Okay.
October 7th. We can use another one if you don't want, but I'll just throw.
that's a good one.
I'll just throw that one out for now. We both agree that not all Muslims think this is a great idea.
Right.
Okay. Now we have to figure out what percentage of Muslims, like we get that, I would imagine, from polling data.
Yeah.
What percentage of Muslims do you think, like, have you read about polls?
Yes. Well over half. Well over half.
Well over half.
And the thing is, this is slightly better in the United States than in
Well
Europe.
over
Yes.
half.
In the United States, over half. A little bit over half. In Western and Northern Europe, well over half. And this is why, to go back to the earlier part of the conversation, we cannot talk about Islamism. People sympathize with Hamas and are called Islamists. And I want to tell these people, no, they're not Islamists, they're Muslims. Because this is what they think. Again, you can say then there are some Muslims who are better assimilated and more
there's
peaceful
data
and so
for
on.
that. There's actual data.
There's actual data for this. Yes.
So let's use another example.
Okay.
So let's just kind of go through the Ferris wheel of examples. So I've seen virtually from polls in the UK, Holland, and Germany, almost no Muslims support gay marriage.
Right.
That's kind of making your point for you. So I guess I'm just trying to tease out now.
Yeah, this is still our own Western, I don't want to use the word prejudice, but our own Western acculturation that makes us struggle with this idea. That makes us
I
struggle
do struggle with the
yeah.
idea. I do struggle with it.
Yeah, but make us struggle with this idea that seemingly nice and pleasant people, and not just seemingly, but actually nice and pleasant people, you can be hosted by a Muslim family and have a wonderful time and so on. Normal people still have this, what we would consider and what is an incredibly evil ideology. People who are otherwise pleasant and charming and so on. And this is something that we have to face. Because otherwise we really don't understand what is going on here and what we're doing to ourselves.
It's very, very interesting. I'll share a personal anecdote, if I may.
Of course.
So I have two kids, and they're both gay. And I have I wouldn't call him a friend, but a Muslim friendly I'm with. And I mentioned meeting my son. He's like, is it your son a homosexual? I can't do the accent. But I said, yeah. He said, no. He's not going to meet with him. But he's been great to me. He's like,
your Muslim friend isn't going to meet your son because he's...
Well, I said, why don't you won't, let's get together with my son. And he's like, no.
All right.
And I just was like, wow.
And this is going to be a shock for a lot of Americans because what we often hear from a lot of Americans, including some conservatives, is that, oh, well, I have, my doctor is a Muslim or my next door neighbor is a Muslim, and they're perfectly nice, normal people. And that may very well be the case. And some of them truly are assimilated and don't take this aspect of their religion very seriously. But when push comes to shove, a lot of these people, a lot of these conservatives, a lot of these Americans will discover that tribalism dies hard. And they will discover that when push comes to shove, when we actually get to a more serious clash of civilizations, they will discover that where many, not all, but where many of these seemingly very normal, well-adjusted Muslims, where they actually stand, where their sympathies actually lie. That's going to come out. And there will be people who will be shocked by what they find out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, not necessarily to overshare, but that was really hard for me.
Yeah.
It's
I
like,
can imagine your own son. Yeah,
those are my kids. It's like, and just to hear, and he was just such a good guy to me. Like he was like, So that was hard.
And
to
now
me.
one can be like politically for or against gay marriage. I myself happen to think that gay marriage legally is a bad idea for society. That's
a conversation for another.
It's
day,
another
not
conversation
now,
for another
yeah.
time. But again, not even to want to dignify the humanity of a gay person. That's a whole different story.
That's exactly
right. I would agree. That's horrible.
Yeah. So Hamas, October 7th, gay marriage. I read one the number of Muslims in Her Majesty's Armed Forces. You could go through these metrics. So I guess I'm struggling right now with two things. I'm struggling with the fact that I don't want to believe this stuff.
Yeah.
I just don't want to believe it.
The polls are there, and it's partly the polls are there, and partly just walk the neighborhoods and speak to the people. Not showing, maybe you have a great deadpan style, So if anybody can do this, it's you to actually get people to tell you what they actually think. That might be
Yeah.
hard for somebody
People,
like me.
I do that in the show, and I get these comments. Oh my God, Boghossian didn't know that, or Boghossian's ignorant about that.
Yeah,
or,
no,
I've
I've noticed that about you as well. I love the deadpan thing. You kind of have to, so because you're trying to get people to really say what they think.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
this works. But yeah, and I mean, I'm Jewish myself,
I didn't
so
know that.
yeah. So I probably wouldn't be able to get away with it, but I mean, I'm not, I'm culturally, if you will. But you go ahead and actually just speak to the people and you find out what they think. So empirically you can discover it, but then there are also the poll data.
So here's the other thing that I struggle with, and I don't want to turn into a complainer because I talk about this all the time, and I'm just like, we try so hard to get people on the show who disagree with us, who have some kind of credentials, really try hard. We finally found one guy who's a Muslim who's, well regarded, so he's going to come on the show and talk to us. But part of the thing that I just feel like they're robbing me. I feel like I'm being robbed of an opportunity to correct a mistaken notion that I have. And that's why, like, when I have people on the show or on the left, like, Destiny or David Pacman or whoever, or I had a terrible, terrible interview with someone who's on. I really go out of my way to not push back too much and to really softball and like everything's so gentle, because I feel if I push back even a little bit, then I can't get anybody else on the left to come on. I can't get postmodern. I can't get identitarians. So I'm just like kid gloves handing it to them. Yeah. We tried. Our project director has tried an unbelievable number of hours to get Muslims on the show, like Muslim apologists, Muslim academics, and like people who are sincere believers. Not just cafeteria Muslims.
Right.
Okay. And I just want to say this because I just want to get this off my chest. And I just feel that them not coming on not only robs me of an opportunity to correct a mistake, because I would love to hear someone tell me, this guy Benedict, he's just full of shit. Like, this is just not true. I'm totally pro-gay marriage. I completely believe in law of abrogation.
There are Muslims who think that, but then, of course, that's because they have abandoned much of the Islamic faith, if they say that.
Yeah, and then, but then the problem is if I get someone who honestly says, someone say, well, that's just takfir, like just like faking for an audience. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so this is all extremely grim and sobering. Mm-hmm. Is there any?
this is what we grim and sobering. This is what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, it is grim and sobering. Yeah. It is grim and sobering, and
we're philosophers after all.
We're philosophers.
We're not supposed to be too upbeat, right?
Yeah, and and I know that because you write about this, you publish about this, but I know I just get so many emails like you're a bigot.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way I've been an outcast from the academic establishment, as you can imagine. I mean, you know everything about this yourself. So for me, it doesn't, like, if I thought that, maybe, there's a professorship there at Princeton that's around the corner.
Oh, no, you have to say it's the opposite.
Yeah, exactly. Then I could say maybe, maybe I should, keep my mouth shut.
Yeah.
But
this is a great freedom, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
This
is such a close chapter of my life that
I know.
Just delight in saying whatever I like.
Do you still publish peer-reviewed stuff?
So my last book, Western Self-Contempt, which we talked about last time, that was peer-reviewed, Cornell University Press. And I was like, that wasn't about Islam so much, but I also was lucky because the philosophy acquisitions editor at Cornell was or is a Catholic and a little more traditional, so she was open to those kinds of ideas. So I was lucky there. And I even told her for the peer review, could we try to find the 3 philosophy professors in the United States who are not Marxists? And I think she went out of her way to try to find non-Marxists.
Yeah, they all skew. And even then, they don't. They write to like 20 people at most.
Yeah, exactly.
They're
but
just
so
like this incestuous little thing. Yeah.
But like on a regular basis, peer-reviewed articles, no, it's not something that would be allowed. I don't think.
I miss it. I do miss doing that because I just feel that it hones my thinking, and I do like the idea of kind of making a contribution.
Yeah, absolutely. But
is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
No, I don't think so. Well, we did one subject we did touch upon, which was non-Western oikophobia. If it happens in, there is an attitude that this is purely a Western phenomenon, and it's mostly a Western phenomenon, but not exclusively. We do get non-Western oikophobia when, as a result of Western influence. A personal example is I was a teacher for a while in eastern Namibia, out in the Kalahari Desert, and which I also like to mention when people like to call me racist or something like this, like, well, you were basically calling people like me racist. I was actually working in an African village. But anyway.
And just on that, by the
Yeah.
way, people call me racist. I took my daughter's adopted from China. She was disabled at 2.5.
Oh.
Like, I try not to talk about it, but like, these people, I tell you what, fuck you.
Yeah.
You take a kid out of an orphanage at 2.5 who has a
Exactly.
disability, and then we can have that conversation.
Yeah.
Until then, you're just like, you're a loser.
Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Like one shouldn't even try to defend oneself really because one shouldn't accept
Right.
such a ridiculous premise of such a ridiculous accusation. But 100% I agree. What happens then, for example, in this, you see similar things in India too. For example, in certain places around the world, non-Western places, that a member of an African tribe in a village somewhere in the desert, he'll travel into. Not just in Namibia and many sub-Saharan countries, will travel into the capital city of his country where there are more Western things, cars, computers, movie theaters, all of these things. And so they will become seduced, if you will, for lack of a better word, by these things. And so then when they come back to their ancestral village, they look down with contempt at these traditional tribal ways because they've experienced Western things, which seem to be much more attractive. And so that's a kind of oikophobia as well that exists in the non-Western
That's
world.
interesting. That's super interesting.
Yeah. But so the difference between non-Western and Western oikophobia is that Western oikophobia, it's stimulated by contact with other cultures, but it still arises more as a homegrown intellectual movement, whereas the non-Western oikophobia, in this paradigmatic example, comes more as a direct result of overwhelming Western influence. So that's the difference. But we do find it a little bit outside of the West as well, yeah.
Okay, anything else I should have asked you that I didn't ask? Or anything you want to ask me?
There are lots of things I want to ask you. That would take us in many different directions. But
Go ahead. We have a few minutes. left. Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. No, I just want to say I appreciate the. You mentioned the deadpan. This is actually something I was talking to somebody about, actually, in reference to you about this. The kind of deadpan attitude, because you're trying to elicit as honest responses as possible. I think it's. And you mentioned it kind of before we went on air. You said something about the importance of honesty to give honest answers and so on.
Yeah.
For me, it's the easiest thing in the world to be honest, because I have this kind of attitude that to the academic establishment or anyone else who would insult us and what we do, their insults are like music to my ears. And
See, that's good.
so honesty is, I can't imagine not being honest.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I was thinking, sometimes people ask me questions and I just find them hilarious, like really funny. And then every once in a while, somebody will send me something like, why did you laugh at that? I mean, I laughed at it because it was just funny.
Yeah.
Like, and so there's a difference between an interview and when I'm doing the street epistemology stuff, we put people in the match. I try to do the best job I can to be neutral, to not let people know my opinion. But when I'm playing that game myself, because I wouldn't ask someone to do something that I wouldn't do. So I often go on the mats and sometimes I just laugh because these things are just so uniquely stupid. Like, they're just so stupid.
Yeah. But this is kind of what I was getting at, because I was wondering, like, I've seen some of these things that you do, and if you find it, I mean, I admire your. I don't know if it's self-control on your part, or if it comes easy for you to just be a kind of a neutral foil for people, because some of the things you hear people say on the show. As you say, are precisely what you said they are.
Yeah, I remember.
But does that come easy for you? Or do you have to really try hard to keep it in?
I start with the posture, kind of a Socratic posture of being genuinely curious.
Yeah.
Like I really am genuinely curious about why someone believes something. I remember I did something at a college campus when we were on tour, and a black girl was telling me about like spraying Lysol in someone's face, and it was just she just told the craziest story, and I remember just thinking to myself, like, why on earth would anybody think that spraying Lysol in someone's face who they think is offending them? So, but I think by and large, I'm genuinely curious about why people believe what they believe. And I think that posture of curiosity is a prophylactic against being startled or being offended or being anything.
And I think it's a great attitude because, I mean, being offended is a drug. And I think there's a certain naivete, in a good sense of the word, that we should have as philosophers and as thinkers in general, this kind of naivete where we're so almost in a childlike way open to any kind of possibility. And this is something also that I'm kind of writing a little bit about now, in a more methodological vein. But basically, to rid ourselves of some very silly academic strictures on our conversation, and to kind of have this. Yeah, almost childlike openness to anything, and we'll find that in terms of actual philosophical and scientific discovery, that's actually the better attitude to have.
Yeah, I'll tell you that if you're having a conversation with somebody and someone says something like idiotic, you can kind of discard it and throw it away. The problem is when you're doing those street epistemology sessions, they are absolutely intellectually exhausting. Like every single night I go home and I am passed out. Here's why. Not only can you not discard something, you have to keep everything everybody says resonant in your brain. So not only the conclusions, but the reasoning. So you have to constantly keep bad reasoning in your head for everybody at all time, and every moment of that conversation. And you just can't let it go and discharge it and be like, okay, that's idiotic. And it's exhausting. But again, I think it's curiosity. And I think my golden rule is I only ask people questions if I genuinely want to know the answer. Because if I want to know the answer, other people probably want to know the answer
But
too.
you don't go into these conversations thinking like, I really do know the answer to this question. I just want to know what other people think.
How could I not?
Yeah.
But I don't go into the conversation thinking, I wonder what other people think. I go in the conversation thinking, I wonder what their reasoning is.
Okay.
And if they have reasoning that's superior to my own, it kind of reminds me of, you ever watch Star Trek?
I was more of a Star Wars guy, yeah.
Oh, God.
So,
those
two groups.
You're dead to me. But there's this episode in Voyager when a Borg from the past meets a Borg from the future, and the Borg from everybody wants to assimilate everybody. But anyway, I think about it in terms of, if someone has a good process of reasoning that's superior to my own, I want to adopt that process because then that conclusion is more likely to be true. So that's how I think about that's part of the way I think about the process.
Yeah.
Plus, I honestly believe that everybody can live a life of reason. I sincerely believe that. I sincerely believe that reason emancipates.
Yeah, I might be a little more Humean on that front. I mean, I certainly, I would, what you say, I would certainly hold up as an aspiration. I think maybe in de facto things are a bit different, but yeah, it's certainly
we know
worthy
that
goal.
We know, for example, with apostasy, right? We know people leave religions all the time. We know people discard beliefs and hold beliefs. And increasingly, as I get older, I'm coming to realize that I think I've known for a long time people don't hold beliefs for epistemic reasons. They hold them for non-epistemic reasons.
Right.
Been writing about that for 20 years. But they hold those for moral reasons. They hold those for communal reasons. They hold those for... And so how do you convince people not to believe what you believe, but to honestly evaluate evidence and reasons independently?
I would say it goes a little bit to a remark you made earlier, which I think unfortunately is true, that what's going to change people's minds in Europe, for example, about some of the things we've been talking about, is not so much, unfortunately, this kind of conversation or articles and so on that we write, but rather them seeing how their neighborhoods around them are being transformed for the worse and so on, that's going to have a more immediate impact, if you will.
It kind of reminds me of putting the frog in the boiling water. Like I think of they call it the child grooming scandal, but it's just this incredible industrial rape scandal in the UK. Yeah. And even when I talk to many Western feminists, I'm thinking of one, I won't name her. I'll name her, Julie Bindel. Even when the problem is not with a subset of men, like they think the problem is with all men. But even that, the fear of people being labeled racist, the fear of if the industrial rape of your children isn't going to change your mind, well, you're done. Yeah. Your society is cooked. It's over.
Yeah,
that's
you see
it.
this.
Bye-bye. It's over.
I did see there was some story about some father or other whose daughter had been, and basically did make some comment to, I don't remember exactly what the comment was, but something to this effect, that who kind of relativized the rape of his own daughter, which, is
or women get raped in Western Europe and they don't want the perpetrators, they feel bad, they don't want them to be sent back. And so...
Yeah, I mean, that's the genuine pathology.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's why I asked you about the United States. They don't care about themselves. Right. Okay, there's a fringe minority of people who want to close the borders and such, and I know I'm going to get 100 comments, that's not true, that's not true. Well, then close the fucking borders. Yeah. I mean, that's why I try to always separate illegal immigration from legal.
Plus, I would also say, in fairness to our European friends, this is more or less true depending on the country we're talking about, but there is such a thing, of course, as parliamentary systems that are designed to make these things more difficult, where if you speak with regular people, not that it's a majority yet at least, but the fact that there is actually a larger proportion than one if you look at the government and the people in government, you would think nobody wants this. But that if you do speak to regular people, there is at least a larger proportion of regular Europeans who do think that borders should be closed, but that they're not, because of the way the parliamentary systems work, that they're not able to translate that opinion into government action. There is, again, more in some countries than in others, but that is to some extent the case.
Just a final question, I'm curious. Do you worry about your safety at all?
I generally no, because I'm not particularly well known. I've gotten more attention now since my book on Western self-content was published. It's something I think about occasionally, but not really. I could make this very personal to answer that question if you want.
Please.
So about basically the worst thing that could possibly have happened to me has already happened to me, which was the death of my brother and only sibling to cancer about 7 years ago. We grew up without a father, and he was the older one, so he was not only my brother, he was like a father to me. He was the only male role model I ever had. He was my best friend. He was everything to me. And he died. He was only 42. And thank you. Yeah. And so when you've been through something like that, you almost have the attitude that, give it your best shot, because you're not afraid of anything anymore. Because, and again, I'm not, and I don't say that in a braggadocious way. I'm not saying I'm braver than anybody else. Is not what I'm saying. It's just that it leads to a different outlook on life. Death is always closer to you in my mind because of that reason. So no, I think my job is to be a philosopher, to write, to get as close to the truth as I possibly can, and that's that.
Awesome. Yeah. Benedict, thank you. I appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.